Hello, this is Robert Swartwood. I am joined tonight by Duane Swierczynski.
You nailed it, Robert.
Did I
Good
get
job.
that correct? All right. I thought I was going to fuck it up, but I did not. Perfect. So Duane was nice enough to join me. Duane, if you have not read Duane, I don't know what you've been doing because he's literally has written got like everything, it feels like. He's the Edgar-nominated author of 9 novels, including Revolver, Canary, Severance Package, and the Shamus Award-winning Charlie Hardie series. He's written over 250 comics for Marvel, DC, Dark Horse, Valiant, and IDW, including the Black Hood, which actually I got the first 3. I don't know how many are there, but
I think 3. You have it all.
Okay, I got them all here. Honestly, I found these at Ollie's for a nice price, so I haven't had a chance to go through them yet. But the first comic in the Archie's Dark Circle imprint. He's also collaborated with CSI creator Anthony
Zuiker.
God damn it.
I know, right?
On the best-selling Level 26 series. He lives in Burbank with his wife and children. So Duane, thanks for hanging out.
Of course, Robert, thanks for having me. This is my first Facebook Live appearance, so yeah, I have no idea what I'm doing, but I expect you to guide me through it all.
Honestly, I don't know what I'm doing either. So we're both okay, so we're mainly here to talk about your new collection,
right,
called LUSH and Other Tales of Boozy Mayhem. You have a Gray Connolly blurb on the front, and the back a John Carpenter blurb. Obviously it's a short story collection.
Right.
We're going to get into that. I actually went through my office. I don't know about you, but there's just piles of books everywhere. My wife is always yelling at me. So yes. I dug out some books that I was able to find, such as The Wheelman.
Oh, nice. Old school classic. Yeah.
Severance Package.
Nice.
I feel like I have a lot of the other ones on Kindle. I think there's some around here also. And then obviously, I think this is your most recent kind of print thing, which obviously your name's not on the cover, but the title of your novella, 3 Days to Live.
Yes.
For anyone who hasn't read this yet, it's one of those 3 novella books. So Duane has a really cool story in this one. Which you've been doing a lot of stuff with Patterson recently. You started with the book shots.
Yes.
If I remember correctly, you did 2 book shots.
3 total. The first one called The House Husband.
Oh, you did do 3 total. That's right.
Yeah.
The House Husband was the one when they were paperbacks, and then after a while they kind of stopped doing the paperbacks, and then everything was just digital. And there was the one, it was really cool. It was about the little drone in Philly.
Yes. This is embarrassing. I just blanked on the title. I was very proud of the title. The Shut-In. I was like,
Shut-In. Yes. That was a really fun story. Actually, I remember, I think I DM'd you after I had read that, because I really dug that one. And then also cool. Stingrays, which I want to say I read probably about a year or so ago. It's like he stopped doing the book shots, I guess.
Yeah.
Which is kind of a shame, because they were really cool things. Just kind of like, read them on the phone while you're like, in the grocery store or anything, just waiting in line.
Yeah.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong. Stingrays for me felt like it was the setup for what could have been a series.
Absolutely. I think it was at one point. The idea was like that was supposed to be a springboard for this cool, team of investigators, but Hollywood, it's weird. These things, people love an idea, and then it takes a lot to really push something into existence. Honestly, I've been out here for about 7 years now, and I realized that, wow, you really have to have, if not yourself, you have to push your own stuff, but you also need someone who's an advocate who really will push hard and like really kind of break through all, because there are a million reasons to say no to something. And there's always an easy way to say, nah, not for us, but you have to push through all that and kind of make it happen. I know it sounds mystical and weird, but that's the truth of it. You need an advocate, this fierce advocate to like push things through. So
yeah, and I'm sure it's the same thing for the film business, the same thing even with publishing. It always cracks me up when you have some writers think like, oh, I'm going to sign with this publisher and they're going to do everything for me. It's like, what are you smoking? Like literally even the big name authors, the ones who are making a shitload of money, like, they are still having to hustle to like, stay on top. And so it's just it's part of the game.
All of us learned that, it's funny. When I had an agent before I had a publisher. So it was like, oh my God, I have an agent. I've got it made. Well, not quite. You have to sell it, And then I had, if I got a publisher, and it's like, well, that's good, but like you to actually make it to, you know, have your work out there with a lot of people, it's just a different ball game. It's very hard. No one realizes how hard it is and how long it takes, you know. And so many overnight successes are the result of just years, as you know, years and years of just plugging away, you know, and trying to push your work. So there's never, I'm not sure if anybody I know is like thinks they've made it. You know, they're always trying to hang on to what they've achieved and then kind of push forward. And you know, not guaranteed anything happening beyond that. That's the truth of it.
I think it's always dangerous if you're ever in a position where you feel satisfied, where you feel where like you feel like, yes, you know what, I've met my goal. Like it's always, I mean, in fact, I mean, like I'm sure even someone like Tom Cruise is still kind of never happy with, you know, his films, and like, you know, he's always pushing. I know that, you know, at least the interviews I've heard with Chris McQuarrie, like he talks about like he's always pushing, like, you know, we can do better.
Yeah.
And it's like,
but isn't that great though? To me, that's a great thing. I never want to actually, if I'm never satisfied with my work in my life, that's great, because I'm always trying to push them to do something better, do something weirder, you know, push it. If I ever feel satisfied, I know I'm done for. It's like you should feel that way, which is maybe why we're all miserable. But I do honestly, I do think it's like part of what, you know, keeps writers going. You always want to, you know, achieve the unachievable. You know, I never start a book thinking, oh, I can nail this. This is great. Got it easy. No, I always start a book thinking, how the hell am I going to pull this one off? How will I do this? You know, and that's the fun is like trying to figure that out as you're going through it.
Yeah. And I'm sure it probably is for everybody, but usually for me, you know, when I'll start a book or a story or whatever, I'll think like, okay, this is going to be really cool. And then when I'm doing it, I'm thinking like, this is awful. This is never going to be good. And then even when I finish it, I'm like, I'm not sure about this. And it's not, you know, it reminds me of the great Harlan Coben quote where it was like, only bad writers think they're good.
Yes. Oh yeah.
And that's for sure. And I was like, yes, that is very good. I mean, the writers who think like, you know, I mean, it's, I don't know, writing is just always this thing just filled with self-doubt. And but anyway, I mean, we can, you know, go on and on about that, but time is limited. So I want to talk about LUSH.
Yes.
So these are stories that, I mean, over 20 years old.
Some are brand new. Some are like, go back even 30 years, actually.
30 years. I mean, actually, you even kind of snuck us your very first story, which I'm surprised you even still, I don't even know from like middle school or whatever, if I still have, you know what I mean? Like I always probably tried to, or my parents would try to save things like, but you snuck your very first story, you said, into the introduction.
Yes. I mean, like, it was actually the first published story I've written. Believe me, before that, I wrote a lot of bad stories. I have a whole box full of awful things, but that was the first actually I paid to do it. I was paid, and it appeared in a horror convention sort of pamphlet, or, you know, program. That was great for a 17-year-old. I felt like amazing validation. That was incredible. And I stole that from Neil Gaiman. Neil Gaiman in Smoke and Mirrors, he snuck a little short in his introduction. I always love that, like kind of the stealth story. So that would be fun to do that. Yeah.
I had done something similar. I had edited an anthology a long time ago, and someone had told me to put my own story in it. And I was like, I don't want to do that. But I mean, it was like, they were really short stories. So what I ended up doing was in the introduction, I, you know, used one of my reprints, because I was like, because it was the very first one I had done. I found it was very interesting that your career, it kind of almost mirrors like, so like for me, I started out like, you know, horror, you know, like in middle school, when I was in 6th grade, the movie Jurassic Park came out, you know, totally got onto Michael Crichton, was reading all of his books, you know, even the ones he was doing that he had done under the pseudonyms. From there, my very first King novel was Insomnia. And I remember, which, you know, Insomnia is not really the best first King novel, but I remember just finishing it, loving it. And from there, like, it was like, I wanted to be a writer, but I want to be a horror writer. Yeah. And so I kind of felt the same thing with you, which you had even said was interesting, where you said, and I wrote it down here, where King had taught me the mechanics of how to write a story. Clive Barker showed me the goal I should be shooting for. Yeah. But then at some point, you know, you kind of drifted past horror, and correct me if I'm wrong. No, this is true. To more like, you know, crime thrillers. And it's like the same thing that happened to me. Like a lot of my early stuff was more of that speculative, the horror stuff. And then I, you know, just became more, and it's like, as much as I really enjoy that genre, like, I just don't know, like, I don't know, I just kind of felt like, like that's something that's kind of like in the rear view. Like, I don't really know I had it in me, to like write a horror novel or write a horror story, even though I enjoy that stuff. I just kind of felt like more my heart and mind is more with the thriller crime. I don't know if that's like the
Yeah.
same with you, but I just kind of felt it was like, oh wow, we kind of had the same type of thing going on
Yeah.
there.
I mean, it's funny. The from horror, my gateway drug was two novels. One was Cold in July by Joe Lansdale, which was like I knew Joe Lansdale from horror stuff. And I was like, oh, this is great. Oh, what's this thing? Okay, this is cool. And it just blew my mind. I'm like, wow, okay, this is crime fiction, this is mystery. Because he's doing the same things he was doing in horror, but it's all, quote, real world. I mean, it was no supernatural stuff. It was just kind of, amazing. Just people, on the worst days of their lives, which fascinated me. The other one was Robert Frigno did a novel called Horse Latitudes. Same thing. It was like I picked it up as paperback on a whim, and I was like, wow, this is all the intensity and all the creativity that I kind of saw in horror, but in the real world. So that kind of changed my kind of passion into like, okay, what is this field? I need to just dive into it and learn about it. So for me though, it's funny, horror is not in the rear view. Horror is almost the fickle mistress I can never quite capture. I do want to write a horror novel someday, a full on. I've dabbled in it. I've done little things and stories, but I still have that urge in me to do that. To sort of do a full on horror novel, a horror movie. I'm working on a spec screenplay now that's, a full on small budget horror movie, inspired by Clive Barker again, doing Hellraiser. That was based on his novella, and he kind of made his own small, independent movie. He didn't quite know what he was doing. He was a theater director. It was his first time, I think, directing something, and he just knocked it out of the park, and to me, it's like, that's inspirational. Okay, all it takes is having, this vision you have, and you can see the movie on your head on the screen. How do you translate that on a page and then convince other people to do it with you, and make it? So that's my sort of my inspiration.
So this collection, you said, okay, so it features 18 stories.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
These are not every single story that you've published though. Like I'm assuming you kind of, I mean, like basically let's kind of go back. How did this collection even come together? I mean, you've written obviously now, what we talked about was it was 9 novels, a shitload of comics,
right?
You've done screen work. What, what I mean? At what point in 2023 where you're like, what? It's time to release this, a collection of my short stories. So yeah, kind of take us back there.
Yeah, good question. It was actually two people. David J. Scow, who is one of my favorite writers, a brilliant short story writer, brilliant both horror and crime novelist. He kept bugging me because he had a good friend, John Scolari, who founded Cimarron Street Books. Cimarron Street is named after this I Am Legend author Richard Matheson. That's where he lived on Cimarron Street in LA when he wrote I Am Legend. So that was the inspiration for the imprint. And they've been reprinting a lot of David's work, and kind of, he calls them remixed editions, where they're like, the way they should have been in David's mind. Like, maybe some stories appear, some are pulled out, they're remixed, they're sort of like the collections he always had in mind. So, and he was bugging me for God, I say a few years, like, hey, if you have enough stories, do a collection. This is fun. You should do it. I'm like, I don't know. I was always never confident I had enough to warrant a collection, because I love short story collections like Matheson's Shock series. All these, like, these Barker's Books of Blood. I revere these books. I love collections. So the idea that I had enough to do one on my own was, I wasn't sure, until I finally kind of gathered them all together. And I thought, oh yeah, I do actually, and I kind of have enough I feel proud of to. So yeah, it wasn't everything I've done, but it's almost everything, because I haven't done a lot of stories in print. It's just, novels take, and paying the bills take precedence. But yeah, it was, I finally had enough, and I gathered them together. It was funny. I kind of gathered it all together, and last October I sat down to write the introduction, and I realized that the stories had a really weird through line. In addition to being like genre stories, they're all crime, horror, some science fiction. They're all about booze. And I was thinking I should have called this collection A Cry for Help, a collection. But it was sort of, yeah, this is like the undercurrent of like last 30 years of like grappling with, okay, alcohol fuels all kinds of mayhem in these stories. And I was obviously working something out. So that's kind of where it all kind of came together. And it was, every bit of this was a revelation, like, oh, this is what I was doing when I was actually supposed to be doing other things. I was cranking out little stories here and there, by request, either for an anthology or for a charity anthology or just for fun. I would, do these things. And I realized, yeah, it's almost like a weird shadow autobiography, I call it, of things I wasn't aware of consciously. So putting it together was interesting on a personal level.
Yeah. So let's talk about, the layout. Because like the stories, sometimes because it always fascinates me, especially because I've done 2 collections that I've put together myself. And I don't know if some readers kind of feel like, there's just no rhyme or reason to the layout of stories, where I think oftentimes the writers probably just, kill themselves trying to just
right.
meticulously put, the stories in the right place. And so, what was that process like when once you had the batch of stories that you knew were going to go in the collection? Or did you already kind of at the start kind of think like, okay, you know what, this is probably going to be, my starter, this is going to be the ender? I mean, like kind of like how did that process work out?
What's funny, it's mostly chronological, honestly. The whole collection is mostly in order, except for 1 or 2 cheats. And I wanted to have bookend stories. The first story is called Hilary Palmer's Last Case. That was, one of the first crime stories I did. And it was reprinted a few times. And I thought, okay, this is a cool place to start, the collection. And the last story is actually the most recent one I did. It was actually a sequel to that story in a weird way. I wrote it I was on a writing retreat and I was supposed to be writing something else. And I thought this idea came in my head. Okay, we should do the sequel. Like, why? I had no idea why I should be doing this, but I just did it. And once I had those stories, I'm like, yeah, those are the bookends. Those like kind of are the perfect bookends of this collection. The rest are more or less, if you're going through this collection, it's like me growing as a writer from like, roughly 2002 until last week. That's kind of what it is. So I do think order is important. I like, how artists, musicians will order their album in a certain order, even though most modern listeners don't care. I think I do. Maybe us, Generation X people care more about that, because to me, the order of songs in an album is huge. Like I say, back when we had cassettes, you couldn't skip around on a CD. You're listening to the whole thing, that was important. So I don't think people read stories that way necessarily, but I think order is important.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can't really do it obviously in a print collection, but I know, I think I had done something one time in an ebook edition where I had like how like CDs will have like a hidden track. I did like a hidden story.
Did you?
It was at like the very end. There was it wasn't on the table of contents or anything. And it was only if people kind of realized like, oh, you know what, there's a lot, there's like 90 or there's like 10 more, % on the Kindle or whatever it would be.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things where it's just like, it's cool, but ultimately, you're only gonna like, only like a handful of people are gonna, find it and like get a kick out of it. But so these are stories you said that, obviously have gone back almost 3 decades.
Yeah.
So are these stories as is, or did you do the same thing like David did, like where you kind of did a remix, or did you revise, or or did you fight the need to revise and just like, what, I want to leave them as is, or how'd that work?
Great question. I mostly left as is. I kind of corrected obvious typos. I didn't want to rewrite anything or kind of make myself seem smarter than I was, than I was 30 years ago. I think they're what they're meant to be. I don't want to mess around too much with them, and I don't think, actually, for the record, I don't think David rewrote his stories. It's more like he reordered the order of the stories in the collections. He kind of shuffled around, not the stories themselves, I'm pretty sure. I just to me, that is 2 things. It can be like trouble because it's like it feels inauthentic to rewrite your stories from 30 years ago or 20 years ago even. But also I thought, that's who I was at the time. That's important to kind of capture that, I guess. The only thing that matters really to me with any kind of writing is that it comes from yourself. It's funny, yesterday I was involved in or listened to a Ray Bradbury sort of a Zoom kind of thing with a Library of America. And the biggest advice that kind of stuck with me was like, Ray Bradbury realized that your writing has to come from yourself, your soul, your id. That's the only thing you have to give, because there have been a million plots, and the same plots have been told over and over again. We all know the tropes, but like what makes things different is your voice and that kind of weird thing from your soul you're putting into it. So I thought revising would mess with that, my younger self, which I shouldn't be doing. Probably a highfalutin answer, but I do believe that you shouldn't mess with your old stuff.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Plus you can drive yourself crazy just going back and just trying to go through old stuff.
For sure.
So I had noticed. Now I've been very busy, so I've only gotten about halfway through so far. But I
Yeah,
would
thank
say
you.
the first 100 pages. I'm just gonna go out on a limb here. The majority of these stories are in first person.
They are, which also another surprise. I didn't realize they were almost all first person.
Almost all first person. And then I went back and I was like, all but one of your novels is in third person.
Right. Very weird, right?
So,
Yeah.
so did you feel, and well, and we're going to get into this too. Well, let's just start with this. So your one story is in second person.
Yes.
Now, I love a good second person narrative.
Me too.
Stuart Onan's A Prayer for the Dying is one of the best novels because it's in second person.
It's great.
In fact, that kind of showed that you could write a novel in second person. I remember this was a long time ago. I was at some workshop. I'm just going to name drop, but David Morrell was there, and he somehow it had come up that I had this idea to like do a novel second person. He was basically like, "You can't do that.
Don't do that."
And like I was kind of like, fuck you. Like it was like more reason to do it. And I did it. And I think it was good. But I mean, you still are going to get people who are like, oh, it's second, because like they had this idea where if it's a second person, they feel it's like it's them. And it's like, no, it's the same thing as it's the character. It's like I don't know. That's how I view it. Like the same thing with your story. You're not talking like the reader is the one you doing this. It's like, it's the character.
Yeah.
And I don't know, but I just, whenever I always get excited when I see the second person, I should say utilized well, because there are times where it's not utilized well, but when it is, I feel like it's almost great. You don't even realize it.
You know, it's two inspirations. I mean, I'm a little older than you are, but I remember the Choose Your Own Adventure novels. Those were huge. They're all second person by default. It's like you're going down the hallway, a goblin comes out with a sword. It's like, okay, what am I? That's kind of, it's very exciting because you're in that story quite immediately. But the other thing I think of it too is like, it's almost like second person stories are God telling you your sins. It's like God saying, well, you did this and you thought this and you went over here. It's like, oh my God, you know everything. So you're in my head. That to me is a fascinating place to be, right? Because the author always thinks they're God. So if the reader can be like the sinner, what a great kind of construct, right? Have someone go through all their sins that you're telling them they're doing. That was the inspiration, I mean, for that, you know. That story is like a guy who's just fucking up morally. And to me, it was like God telling him when he messed up.
So from the start, you knew that there was going to be a second person, or like, you know, or were there, even with some of the other stories in here, if you remember, like, did you start writing them maybe in third person and realize, you know what, no, I'm gonna do first person, or did you know, like right off the bat, okay, you know what, this is a story in first person? I mean, how do you kind of gauge that, even with the novels? If I remember correctly, Expiration Date's the only one in first person, correct?
And also my very first novel, Secret Dead Man, is also first person. So
that's something else we were going to get into. I was going to ask you too, if that's going to be, you know, from, you know, like, I mean, is there plans to reissue that?
I'm working on it. I very badly want to do that because I think it's sort of got lost in the shuffle. It was a small press and it's out of print now. But yeah, I noticed that myself with more experimental stuff. I go for first person. And then a lot of my novels start in first person, honestly, and they kind of then devolve like, oh no, wait, I got to do this in third person because I want to see other characters and jump around a bit. That's kind of how it happened. Even California Bear, my newest one, the first 100 pages were first person. And I thought something's not right. I need to like branch this out. It needs to be bigger. That's what it is. It's sort of scale. A novel is bigger. So like you need, like, to me, I like having a lot of voices, where a short story is more intimate. You can pull off one guy telling you about one narrator telling you this fucked up thing happened to me and you won't believe it. Kind of a barroom story is kind of what I have in mind. Whereas novels, I guess the canvas tends to be, you know, bigger. Secret Dead Man was like me trying to figure out how to write a novel. Expiration Date was kind of planned as like a very short novel. So I felt like I could pull that off as a, you know, first person narrator, but everything else, it felt more natural to do third for distance and scope.
That's interesting. So do you feel, because starting out, I always felt like if a book is written in first person, it's one of those things where someone is telling a story, like they're almost like going back. Like I'm thinking of like Bag of Bones, where is mostly he is writing this, this is what happened. And he tells it in first person. The same thing with like the Green Mile. But then at some point, my brain just kind of flipped over, and it was like, no, it can just be first person. Like, I know, like, well, we talked briefly, like you've done a lot of stuff with Patterson, he does that, especially with like the Alex Cross stuff, it's first person. And then you'll do like the third person from the, like, from like the killer's point of view.
Right.
I've always, like Michael Marshall, Smith, but when he did the Strawman trilogy, the same type of thing.
Yeah.
And so I kind of found myself doing that, where sometimes, I will have, like the prologue or the protag in first person, but then I will, that doesn't stop me from then going and seeing what's happening elsewhere. So it's just kind of interesting to kind of feel that in a way that, I mean, and, there are other times too, where it's like, well, the first person just doesn't work, but, it's interesting how that works.
I should say, all these things I'm saying is like for me, not for how things should be like in the world. I mean, I think,
Oh yeah, no.
Exactly. With like the first person that people pull it off all the time. For me, it's just always, I default to like, oh, okay, I gotta pull back and do something else. Although I will say, I'm writing now the next novels, I'm bringing it honestly longhand in a notebook for the first time ever, and it's all first person. So it may actually stick this time again. I don't know.
Yeah. And I mean, and I think what I had told you before in one of the emails was I found that these talks usually kind of revert more into like craft of writing.
Yeah.
So it's always interesting kind of like talking about just how each writer's, in fact, actually, let's go to it right now in terms of outlining or, like I always hate the term, but people use it, plot or pantser.
Yeah.
And so, and I'm just going to jump right to it. Working with Patterson, I'm assuming you have to outline all that shit.
Honestly, it's just like my own books. It's like they vary. Like some books, he'll give me a very extensive outline, and it's great. It's a whole roadmap. You can see how his brain works. It's awesome. Some things, the shorter ones mostly, sometimes it's just like very, very minimal. It's like, here's a title. What can we do next? I'm like, oh, okay. And I love both versions. I really do love.
Right. But in that instance, do you then have to kind of like present that outline? I'm like, this is where we want to go, or does he give you that like seed and you just kind of, grow that tree from there?
It's been both. And sometimes it's a seed and I kind of present like, here's my take on it. Like a short version. Okay, cool. Let's try this, and this. It's very much, a collaboration. And we kind of map it out. But yeah, it's always, I really wish I had one mode I settled into. If I was an outliner, great. But every book's different. I'm not kidding. It's so funny. Some books I really outline to the nth degree, and the risk there, when you outline too much, it can kill the book because like you've already kind of written it in outline form. I always worried about outlining too much because it's like, in a weird way, it already exists, but in a very, very shallow form. And it's like, oh, it kills it for you. Whereas you're sort of by the seat of your pants, it's exciting. You don't know where you're going next. It's kind of great. It's like, okay, what's the next chapter going to hold? And that keeps yourself engaged in it and kind of hopefully it confuses readers, and then outfoxes them. But I had to do both. I mean, Revolver was the one I remember outlined intensely because it's like 3 timelines and it jumps back and forth. And if I hadn't done that, I would be still writing it because I just didn't know where to go with it. Unless I mapped it out literally on a wall with index cards. That was important. But other books have been like just I've winged it. California Bear, I kind of mostly winged it. Mostly. I had some ideas where I want to go, but it was, the fun of that one was like, okay, I wrote that. I mean, that was like, I started writing it when my daughter was in treatment. My daughter was in treatment for leukemia, and I started writing in her hospital room because I needed an escape. We're there for long hours. She's sleeping. I'm like, I'll pull up my laptop and just start writing a story just for fun. I wanted to have dumb, fun comedy. And that's where I started with. And of course, things went dark. And that book, I kind of put it aside for years. I wasn't sure if I can finish it. And when I pulled it back out again, I'm like, oh no, okay, I got to do this. But I got to do some plotting. But like, it's a much bigger scope than I thought it would be. It's not a dumb, fun thing. It's a dumb, fun thing with other heavier things that I try to work into it. If that makes sense. So that was like mostly, but that to me is like a history of my mental journey after losing a child, honestly, that book. Yeah. So it sounds depressing, but it's actually probably the funniest book I've written, which is it's a lot about my brain.
Well, let's can you talk a little bit, just that comes out next year. Is there just a little bit of like a log line of what that one's about?
Sure. Actually, there is I finally, we finally have a proper description on the Amazon and other sites about what it is. I mean, people ask me what it's about. I say, well, basically it's about an ex-con and an ex-cop team up to blackmail an ex-serial killer. And that's kind of what it's about. But it's also like, it's a more of a family thing too, that I hope catches people by surprise. Because I mean, the fun of that book was like, okay, you think it's one thing for the first 50 or 100 pages, then it's like, oh, this is something very different. And I love when books do that, and that may piss people off, but I do love doing that. It's like, oh, this is something else entirely. And it became very, very, very personal, that book. Yeah. So that's kind of, I don't want to say too much about it because I don't want to, ruin those surprises in it. But yeah, this is hard.
Yeah.
I don't have the Hollywood pitch yet because we're on strike. So I don't have any, I'm not pitching this book, but it's kind of weird that you can't encapsulate it without ruining some things.
Oh yeah, here it is. I found it on.
You found it, okay? Yeah, whatever it is there, you can feel free to share.
Yeah,
but yeah,
follows four unlikely vigilante. Yeah, can't talk.
Vigilante, yes.
Yeah, whose decision to take justice in their own hands pits them against the evil behind California's coldest case. So
Yeah.
Interesting.
Now there, craft wise, the structure I finally settled upon. It was first person. Then I realized no, there's more characters I care about, and became a foursome. Like there was four main characters, and it's third person, but it kind of jumps from one point of view to the other throughout the book. It's almost like, to me, I treat it like camera angles. Okay, we have one character, you're in their camera angle. Let's see what their life's about, what they're thinking, what they're doing, and then jump to the next one. And to me, that the fun of that is you can sort of like, the reader knows all the pieces, the characters don't. That's the fun thing. Like the reader knows, okay, oh, I see what's going on, but beyond all that, the author knows what's really going on. You can sort of like fuck with the reader. They're thinking they're not going on. So it's a whole like daisy chain of like expectations. If that makes any sense whatsoever. But I always think about how a reader's experiencing a book and how can you fuck with them and subvert their expectations in a fun way. That's satisfying.
Absolutely. So, okay, well then real quick, what little can you tell us about the new Patterson that you wrote with coming out next month, right?
It's less than a month. Yeah. August 14th, Lion and Lamb. What's great about that is, I'm sure Jim thought of me for this book. It's set in Philadelphia, my hometown. And it's very much involves the Philadelphia Eagles, which I think Jim assumed I was a big sports fan because everyone in Philadelphia is a huge sports fan. I am not. I'm not a sports fan at all. In fact, the Eagles, I just don't care about whatsoever. But I had to pretend I was and learn that world. And it was fun, actually. I get the Eagles fandom. It was, it's basically two dueling private eyes trying to solve a really complex, high profile, high media profile murder case. And for me, it was a lot of fun just sort of digging up like my memories of Philly and how, imagine the Eagles quarterback was suddenly murdered in their, Maserati on the Parkway. The city would lose its mind. The city would lose its entire mind, and how that would play out, in this investigation. The fun of that book was the structure of that one was a lot of transcripts, conversations, sort of memos. It's a very interesting novel, craft wise or structure wise, because it's not just straight on third person. There are a lot of like transcripts of things, private conversations, notes. I love that structure. It was kind of fun to like, as a hybrid of, I've done a lot of audio dramas with Jim recently, Jim Patterson, and that was like sort of part of that. I think Jim liked, my approach to dialogue, and that was baked into this story.
Yeah, I was going to mention you had the Audible original, the
Guilty.
Yes, Guilty with John Lithgow.
Yes,
a great John Lithgow. And as speaking of Philly, I specifically wore this T-shirt for anybody who gets the reference. Rock, flag, and eagle.
I love it.
An Always Sunny in Philadelphia reference for anybody who doesn't know. But let's see here. How about also in the collection? Let's go back to the collection. In the end, you do also include story notes.
Yes.
And what's interesting about the story notes is at the very beginning, you say, where is it? Basically, if you're anything like me, you immediately skip to this section. So that's what you do for short story collections. You immediately go to the story notes.
I kind of do. Yeah. I'm awful. I kind of want to know what I'm in for. I don't know. It's not really cheating because usually authors don't reveal, endings and story notes, but yeah, I kind of want to know what's okay. Where's this coming from? What's the context? What should I know about this story? I love that. So few authors do this, but I do love when they do.
Yeah, I mean, my preference and what I usually do is, I mean, I'll read the story and then I'll read the story note and I kind of go back and forth. The same thing, I know they always do that sometimes in like, the best American mystery stories or whatever else. Sometimes they have those too.
Yeah.
But sometimes, and I think King has done this a couple times with his collections, the story notes will actually be like with the story.
Right.
At the end of the story, the beginning of the story. Had you considered doing that, or was it always, this is going to be at the very end?
Yeah, it's funny. I always knew I'd put it at the end, but I have seen, King does that. I think Harlan Ellison does that quite a bit too. He'll have notes at the end of like the story. And Harlan Ellison is the king of like the intro and the outro. Like he's great at setting up, an anthology, or the introductions are beautiful. And then the end notes are always fascinating. Like to me, that was my favorite part sometimes of his collections are like, okay, how was this made? How was this sort of put together? But for me though, I thought I'd just put it at the end. Because there's also a phantom story in the end notes. If you noticed, there's I did because
I was going back and forth. I'm thinking like, wait a minute, and I didn't read the note. I just read the title. I'm thinking like, did they miss this? Yeah, I don't give anything away, but it's really cool.
There's a phantom story. The best part of working at like Cimarron Street Books is that they were so on board with anything I want to do. Like there's a lot of Easter eggs, a lot of weirdness in this book. And they were just there for it. They didn't like flinch, like, cool, whatever you want to do, it's fine. That was refreshing. Because,
well, speaking of which, I mean, even the art. So like it's a great cover, but there's art throughout this entire book. Can you talk about that? I believe.
Oh, of course, I'm happy to, because the cover artist is the same as the interior artist. Heather Vaughn. She's a artist from Philadelphia who I just saw her stuff online. This is like just a couple years ago. I'm like, oh my God, this stuff is great, amazing. If I ever have a chance to employ an artist, I will hire her. And it turns out this collection came up, and I, what happened to be traveling back to Philly last November. So I met up with Heather. We had a few beers at Tattooed Moms, on South Street. And we realized that, that I mentioned those bookend stories, Hilly Palmer's Last Case and Pinkerton are, the sequels to each other. It was all set in the same bar, McGlinchey's, which she knew, like she'd been there. It's a dive. Have you been to McGlinchey's before in Philly? Have you been there, Robert?
I mean, I live in Harrisburg. I used to live in Lancaster. I've been to Philly a bunch of times. I've been to bars there. I honestly can't tell you which one I've been into. So I may have been. I don't remember any of them.
Right. McGlinchey's like the quintessential dive bar. I've been going to it since I was 19. Don't tell the cops. I mean, I was getting there with my shitty fake ID. And, it was just a sort of dreamscape of like, bad behavior. It's a dark bar. People still smoked back then. The same jukebox tunes over and over again. So to me, it was like that she got that. So the cover is actually, that's McGlinchey's. If you ask me McGlinchey's, that is a great, she nailed it and nailed the vibe of it. And, she was so cool to work with, because I was like, can we do like a wraparound cover with like, a cool character on the front with a cigarette and a beer, and the back cover is like the shocker of like, oh shit, this guy, you have this cool woman in the front, and then it's like, boom, this guy's having a really bad day at the bar. So that to me is important to have that, that kind of dialogue with the artist. She just nailed it. And I asked her to do a few interior illustrations, and so wonderful is she really, read every story and thought about it. It came back with some really thoughtful, cool ideas that I never would have thought of. Just these little images that I thought she just nailed. Writers can be hacks in their own way. If I was assigning, do this, draw this, it would not have been as cool as what she came up with, which is the reason you should work with cool people who are smarter than you.
I don't think there's a Kindle edition or anything for this, right? It's only print.
Not yet. Coming soon, though. People ask me about that, and I do love, believe me, I love Kindle stuff.
But I would recommend it, get the print edition, because yes, the Kindle edition, it'll go on your Kindle, but just for like all the art and just like the way it's kind of hard to even kind of explain, but there's these little things on the other pages, which at first I'm thinking like, what the fuck is this? And then I realized once I start going through that, I was like, okay, that's really cool.
That was
there's like just a lot of really cool, like a lot of thought went into the layout.
It did, and that was all John Scolari. He's the publisher of Cimarron Street, and he was like, "How about this? Like cool, like neon outtakes." I'm like, "Oh, that's great. I do love when they have like sort of a page of black that almost like little dividers between stories. You know, I don't want it to feel like it's all one big mush. It was just, yeah, again, a dream to work with. I can't impress that enough. Impress upon that not enough. He's great. So yeah, thoughtful dude.
And speaking of, did you know the title? I mean, why did you go with Lush compared to all the other ones? Is it because of the movie deal? Which we can also talk about
yes.
that. If that's still in play
Honestly,
or
yes.
not.
I thought, what's the most commercial title for this thing? Although it's funny, for a long time, the collection was called Mayhem Volume 1. And we had plans to do Mayhem Volumes 1 through 5. I have like stuff I had planned. But I thought, you know what? Mayhem, I'm not sure. It felt too like, what is that? He needed something to go on. So I thought Lush was the obvious choice because, you know, the story Lush, it was reprinted in Best American Mystery Stories a couple years ago. And it was optioned by Chad Stahelski, you know, the John Wick guy, and I was hard to do the screenplay. So I thought, if any stories that are going to pop out of this thing, it's that one. So I thought that was kind of a cool title. It's short. And I thought, you know, for a long time, it was just Lush and other stories. And I thought, oh, the word mayhem, though, I thought was important to work in there. So we came up with Other Tales of Boozy Mayhem, and future editions like something like title, and Other Tales of blank mayhem. It'll be a theme thing if I, you know, ever finish these things. But that was the idea. So they're all mayhem, but Lush was totally a cash grab, a naked commercial ploy. No, I'm kidding. It was
so
yeah.
So have you done the screenplay yet for Lush, or
you
just got hired on it? So
I've
like,
already written
I
it and been fired from it
because
I've written it and I've been fired from it. Yeah.
Well, so I wanted to make sure I read the story. I mean, that was the most recent one I read because I wanted to read the title story before we had talked.
Yeah.
I imagine in your screenplay or in the eventual movie, assuming, you know, we all know how Hollywood is, you know, it might not even happen. Hopefully it does, fingers crossed.
Hope so.
But assuming it does, it's, you know, again, it's almost like there's more of a seed there. Like, you know, the movie's going to be so much more. So like with your screen, I mean, like, can you talk a little bit about that? I mean, obviously we don't want to talk about the short story, but like, how did that kind of, you know, you're basically adapting, it looked like probably like a 4,000 word short story.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. You know, it's funny that was supposed to be like, a lot of these stories started as novels that I just didn't quite finish. It was like, okay, I start something that's a cool idea. I just didn't quite have the legs for a novel, and I put it aside. This one I started about 10 years ago, and I put it aside. And I know exactly, it was 5 years ago, I was invited to do a story to an anthology, a charity anthology for, oddly enough, for leukemia. This is before my daughter was diagnosed. It was like, hey, would you do this anthology in honor of Gary Schultze? He's a bookseller who died from leukemia, sadly. And, you know, it was in honor of Gary. And the only rules were it had to involve like a bookstore and a tuba or something. It was a few rules. So I kind of was like, oh, what can I do? Shit. And I pulled this old story up and I thought, okay, I can make this work for this anthology. I did it. I turned it in and I forgot about it. And it appeared in September of 2018 when my daughter was in treatment, going through a bone marrow transplant for leukemia, which is bizarre. And then, things went horribly. And it came out the next year, you know, and it was reprinted in Best American. I was flabbergasted. This thing was like my back recesses, my you know, desk drawer. This thing became like, it was one of these stories in the Best American, you know, mystery stories anthology. It was bizarre.
Who was the guest editor that year?
Jonathan Latham, who I, you know, again, a huge fan of his.
Nice,
so it was like, wow. Yeah, kind of blown away. This goes to prove I'm not the best judge of my own stuff ever, because I thought this was like a disposable thing. But yeah, it was reprinted, and I started pitching around 2019, and it got a lot of attention. You know, people got it for some reason, and it was, you know, Chad's company kind of had the best vision for it, I thought. So yeah, it was hard to do the screenplay. And the cool thing with, you know, short stories is, whereas you try to adapt a novel, you're just condensing. You're trying to figure out, okay, this, even novels, again, this thing on a grand scale. How do you pull a movie out of this thing? You have to cut a lot of this stuff out. You have to compress it. Story is the opposite. You can actually expand it and, you know, find this world that's in that seed. That was a lot of fun. Trying to, you know, it was almost like writing the novel I was supposed to have written 10 years ago, but never did.
So I don't want to, I mean, we're almost at 7:50 here on the East Coast. I don't want to take up too much of your time, but can we talk a little bit about comics? How did you get into the whole like comic thing? And I mean, that's obviously, you know, you have to outline for all that.
Oh yeah.
And then how does like the screenwriting, how does the comics, like, how does that inform your prose? Or like, do you find that one, informs the other or vice versa? Or
Oh, big time. I mean, I started writing comics. I only had like 3 novels out at the time. And comics taught me how to be more visual in novels. Like it was like, because you have to tell an artist what you see is happening. Whereas, a novel, you can fudge it if you want. You have like characters talking, you're internal. You don't need to see much. But with a comic, you have to like almost like camera shots. You're like sort of writing a screenplay. So in a weird way, for me, it was a nice bridge from prose to comics to screenplays. Was a great training ground, and learning how to write fast and write to order. And you can't screw around. And all you have is, say 22 pages with between 3 and 6 boxes per page. That's your story landscape. You can't go over. You can't. Yeah, just tell your story in those confines. That was a great training for screenwriting for me. And how it happened was, it's funny. I wrote Ed Brubaker just a fan email. Hey, I love your stuff. He was doing great crime stuff, and he happened to actually have read one of my books at the same time. I was, oh wow. I know who you are. You're not some weirdo. And he said, do you ever want to write comics for Marvel? I'm like, I would cut off my right arm to write comics for Marvel. Yeah, what do I do? And he introduced me to this editor, at Marvel, and we started just doing stuff. Started pitching ideas, and it kind of took off from there. It was a time when like I think Marvel and DC were Marvel especially was trying to court novelists to do their some of their scripting, just like Hollywood wants to bring in it's like things go in vogue. Like, oh, this year we want novelists. Next year we want playwrights. Next year, oh, we want poets now. It's like it's a flavor of the month, right? You kind of want to pull in whoever's seen as hot or interesting, and then to adapt to their own storytelling form. So that's how it started, and became kind of a career for a while, actually, and it was great. It's heartbreaking, that career, but it's wonderful and heartbreaking because ultimately you're not in control of anything. It's all but it's wonderful working with an artist you click with, because when you turn in a script, every day is like Christmas. You get pages in the email box. It's like, my God, this is amazing. You'll write something 2 days before, and it's like, then you see it visualized. That's so cool. It's no greater high.
Going back to with the screenwriting, and we were talking about like outlining. I don't know if you've ever done this. I think like a long time ago, I heard Chuck Wendig talk about this, and I've always wanted to try it, but basically outlining via writing the screenplay. So you know what I mean? So you're basically, that's how you outline your novel. And then basically when you're done, you have more or less a finished screenplay. I mean, obviously it's not gonna be like, polished, but that's kind of just because you hit that. And it's one of those things, I don't know, like I'm throwing that out there for anybody who's interested. Like I've always wanted to do it. I haven't done it yet, but I always thought that would be interesting, because I am usually one to just kind of sit down. Like I have an idea in my head, but I'll just kind of go from there.
Yeah.
And then that way you're still kind of just going from there, but it's not more as opposed, because I've done that thing, like we sold an Audible original. It was supposed to be a novella, right? 30,000 word novella. I had to outline it, a couple chapters, whatever else.
Yeah.
Well, when I started writing it, I realized the only way to really make this effective is I'm gonna have to add in some other stuff. Like everything in the outline was there, but to make it work.
Yeah.
And so I ended up going to the editor. I'm like, how long is too long? She's like, well, I don't want anything over like 70,000 words. I'm like, okay, this is probably gonna be like 60. So it was like double the length.
Wow, that's a novel.
And so I know my agent, I think, was a little pissed off, because it was like, well, we basically are getting paid for this.
Yeah.
when I'm turning in this. I'm like, yeah, but in the long run, it's like better for the story.
Yeah.
But that's why I hate to outline, because like I just, once you actually get into the, meat of it, and kind of, things just change, all of a sudden a character does something you don't expect, and it goes a different direction. And
so true. So true. It's funny. One of this newest story in the collection, Pinkerton, I wrote it as a TV episode, just because I thought it'd be fun to just write in that world. Then I realized, no, this is a story. And I rewrote it entirely as a story. So I guess I have done the Chuck Wendig method of like, doing a screenplay first. I haven't never done like a full-length feature screenplay that I've turned to something else. I don't think. No, I haven't done that. But it was, that was fun. It was only recently, maybe in the last 4 years, I've actually learned how to write. To me, writing a screenplay was always translating. It's like you say you're a native English speaker, you want to write in Spanish. To me, it's a translation. But a few years ago, I learned, I can write directly in Spanish. I learned enough about screenwriting to like write directly in that language. Whereas before, it was a matter of really thinking about it and trying to translate everything to achieve the effect I would achieve in a piece of prose. So that was new for me. That was a breakthrough. So I did that with, you know, the Pinkerton that became then Astoria and in the end.
I'm actually just looking through real quick on Deadline here.
Yeah.
I just searched your name in Deadline. Did you okay, Stingray was sold to CBS.
That's right. I forgot about that. Yeah. Yeah. Honestly, but it's also like, you know, it's work for hire. So I mean, it's
right,
great. I love it,
right,
but
right.
yeah. So
The same thing too, though. Did you were you supposed to do something with NBC? I mean, this was back in 2019.
a few things, but yeah, before that, I did a pilot with Chris Morgan, who is he wrote all the really good Fast and Furious movies, which your miles may vary, but I love those things. And he wrote,
yeah, they're fun.
All the heist era was thanks to Chris. Chris is genius. So
did he do 4, the one when they're in Mexico City?
Oh yeah, he wrote 3,
that was one of the better
also
ones.
like used 3 as a springboard to like, okay, let's reinvent this and make this like a heist thing, which fueled the entire series. I mean, the whole thing, the whole, you know, Fast and Furious became a franchise thanks to Chris. So we teamed up on a adaptation of Dan Simmons' novel Darwin's Blade for NBC a bunch of years ago, and that was great. I mean, it was awesome. We worked together, you know, over the summer on it. We pitched it to NBC executives, and this is how dumb I am. I left the meeting like, how'd it go? And Chris is like, dude, we sold it in the room. Like, we did. Like, I just was so like, in Hollywood, honestly, I've learned in Hollywood to like downgrade everything. Like, oh man, we love you means like, yeah, you're okay. You know, cool means we hate you, go away, die. You know, so it's like I always downgrade every Hollywood reaction. So when they said, great, let's do it, I'm like, yeah, they mean like, let's talk about it more and develop it more. But no, they meant let's do it. We're buying this. And I had no idea. Yeah. This is how dumb I am.
Paul Tremblay always tells a story where, you know, I think it was Cabinet Cabinet at the End of the World. The before it became the movie, it became when actually before the book was even released, and I guess they were shopping it around.
Oh wow!
And some producer had called and was basically like, I want to be in the Paul Tremblay business or like some kind of bullshit like that. And Paul said very quickly, right? And very quickly he could tell the guy had not even read the book.
Yeah.
And that's usually how.
I always think my go-to Hollywood movie is Barton Fink. You know, it's like, I'm like, I want to be in the Barton Fink business. We love Barton Fink. And it's like, by the end of the movie, it's like, we can hire 1 million Barton Finks. You're nobody special. You know, it's just like great, you know, they puff you up to tear you down. And that's, you know, how it is.
So I'm trying to think if there's anything else to, what's Redhead?
Redhead. Oh, Redhead.
Yeah, because I saw that was in your Twitter bio, and I was looking for it. I saw it was also in the Kindle edition of The Blonde. There's a short, I guess it's a short story, but did you turn that into something else?
This is me again being dumb. I screwed myself. I mean, The Blonde had a bonus novella called Redhead, because The Blonde, Redhead, and eventually I'm gonna write the 3rd one called Brunette from Hell. That's gonna come at some point. But this Redhead is very different. Although in a weird way, it was inspired by that novella, but it's a very different story, entirely different. It's a comic I wrote for John Carpenter and Sandy King Carpenter's company, Storm King. They do a series of like, you know, horror and science fiction. So this was one of their tales of science fiction anthology. And it's a, you know, what was it? 5 issues, a science fiction noir chase kind of story that, I'm very proud of. It was one of the, you know, things one of the comics I kind of love the most writing. It was very cathartic. So that's out, and we actually were trying to pitch that before the strike happened, trying to pitch that around town, and was getting some interest. And actually, there is interest. There's pretty big producers on it, and we were close to like getting something going, and then we gotta all stop and hit pause. Well, it's for a good cause.
That's Hollywood for you.
Yeah, that's what happens. But
I've heard so many horror stories. I remember Doug Winter with Run was saying that, like, you know, basically he had a movie was ready to go, screenplay, everything, and then like the next day everything fell apart.
I love that novel. That novel's amazing.
Run is and I had it in hardcover, the initial hardcover. I don't know what happened to it.
Yeah.
I don't know what happened to it. It was signed because I'd gotten it at at Nikon, and I always told Doug like it was one of my favorite novels. Like I have no idea why it did not become a much bigger hit than what it was.
Same here. It was like, to me, it was like the same kind of seismic shift of like when I read Don Winslow's Savages, like, oh my God, here's a voice. I mean, Don Winslow was doing great stuff before that, but it was like, man, okay, this is balls out here. Let's entertain the fuck out of you. And Roman,
especially like, if you know who Doug Winter is and have met him.
Oh, really?
Like the voice in it is just, I mean, Doug's just like, he's like this DC lawyer, if I remember correctly. And then, but you have like this gangster voice and Ron, it's totally. It's so great.
My favorite writers, ones I've met tend to be the quieter ones and the most fucked up ones. Really, and the ones I admire the most, I meet them. It's like they expect you, I expect them to be like, mohawks and like, piercings. They're just, normal folks. The quieter the writer, the more hardball the fiction, I believe.
Yeah, I can see that. So real quick, so John Carpenter, at the back of the book, you have this great blurb. Duane knows how to slam it down on the table. His tales are up there with the best of them. So real quick, how'd you kind of hook up with John Carpenter of all people?
Again, through my my friend and muse, David Scow. He was doing something for Sandy. They were starting an anthology of horror comics, and David hadn't done many of them. He's like, oh, I need your help. Could you help me write some comics or help me, advise me on these things? I met Sandy. She said, "Will you pitch some ideas?" And we started working together. Sandy's John's wife. She's brilliant. Her, sort of, a longtime producer and just knows Hollywood. Has stories that will curl your hair, and she's fascinating. But yeah, so I started writing, short stories for them, and then eventually started doing longer, graphic novels. And they're just a dream to work with. Sandy, the very first meeting said, "I want your IP. I want your stories in our collections, but keep your IP. We're here to help you." And that was genuine. She's great. Yeah, that's
amazing.
Right? Amazing, right? And totally cool. I would do anything for Sandy, including murder and body removal.
All right. I think we are at 8 o'clock right now. I don't want to take up too much more of your time. So everyone, again, Lush and Other Tales of Boozy Mayhem, available on Amazon, also available directly from the publisher.
Yeah, it's Cimarron Street Books, their website. If you want a signed copy for any reason, if you buy from them and write a note, hey, I want Duane to sign this for me or personalize it, happy to do it. In fact, they'll fill the order, send it to me, it'll come from me, and I'll throw in some extra goodies if you do that. So please do order a copy from the publisher. I'll send you like a severed lizard head or something. I don't know, whatever I find around the apartment.
I'm not sure that will track with medium mail. I think they're going to
or a sticker. All right, maybe a sticker. How about that?
So then where can people find you online?
Oh, geez. My handle of most places is Swierzy. My name truncated, SWIERCZY. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Threads. I'm on Blue Sky. God help me. I'm on Facebook. Yeah, I'm everywhere. If you can type my last name, you'll find me. I'm not hard to find.
Yeah. Speaking of which, you and I are both, I don't know, in retrospect, do you feel that you starting out would have done better with a shorter pen name? Because I have the same issue you do, like especially on a book cover. There's our names can only be so big on a book cover.
Your name's cool though. Your name makes sense. My name's absurd. Yeah, it's funny. I used to know a very short story. I was a fan of Spy magazine back in the day, and one of my favorite editors there was a guy named Jamie Malinowski, because Malinowski is a long Polish name. Like, oh my God, here's my hero. This guy kept his name. After college, I wrote him a letter saying, hey, I'd love to meet you. Would you mind? He graciously invited me up. We had lunch. He's like, my first advice for you, Duane, change your last name. I'm like, fuck. I was like, you're my hero. But I kept it. And to me, it's a double-edged sword. People remember it. They don't know how to spell it, but they'll remember it. No, oh, that Duane guy with a weird last name. But it's hard to sort of like type into a search engine, right? Or type into a
I think you made the right choice. Again, it's one of those things. The trade-off is just unfortunately on book covers we can't get the name as big as like Brad Thor or something. You know what I mean? You just can't have that huge byline on the covers. Which,
although still, props to Mulholland Books. The next one, California Bear, my name is there and it's big. It's my name. The biggest my name has been, which is sort of embarrassing and absurd, but it's there. It's full on. Without saying see next book cover, it's all there, which I'm impressed with.
Yeah,
honestly,
and that's a really, really cool cover, by the way. Were there other drafts of that, or the cover? Was that kind of what Mulholland kind of just presented you?
It was a journey. Let me say that. It was a journey. So, I mean, no, I'm happy where it ended up. It's great. I love how it ended up because it's sort of, I want something colorful and kind of vibrant and fun. And that was cool. It's just, honestly, a lot of it I learned is like teaching your publisher about your own book. Like, hey, that's cool, but here's what I actually have in mind. And here's why I think this is a better vision for it. I have had to learn the hard way over the years. And I know writers are sort of introverted. We're weird. We're quiet, but you have to be your own advocate. My manager, I have this manager who I've been with for 5 years. He's awesome. He's like, you should just, your job is to teach people about your books. You have to tell them what it is. You can't be shy and mysterious, which is my default. I'd rather hide in the back, but I don't want to, be out. I mean, doing this is like supremely uncomfortable. This is hell for me. But I love talking to you, Robert. It's great, but it's also like so unnatural. I'd rather hide in my office here and just write stuff. But I'm trying to learn how to be a better advocate for myself.
Well, I'm glad that you took time to a chat, and congratulations on the collection. I'm enjoying the hell out of it so far. I mean, it is a really fun book. I hope everyone checks it out. Check out. I mean, you obviously haven't really published that much, in the last couple of years, but you're having a shitload of stuff come out in the next year or two.
It's been it's been a tough bunch of years.
Absolutely.
Almost starting from scratch. I felt like I was like rebuilding myself entirely, and finally, it's like, yeah, it's been busy. The 3 books in the same calendar year, or roughly. It's great. It's nice to be back, and I kind of feel like I'm back finally with things I want to do. Can
we talk just real quick? Is good because
sure.
I don't want to take up too much of your time. But
no worries.
We're
cool.
Can you talk about the foundation you have for your daughter?
Oh, happy to. I mean, long story short, sad story short. We lost our daughter Evie, who was wonderful, and she's incredible. Almost 5 years ago, to leukemia. She was 15, and big reader, big nerd like her parents before her. And we in her honor, we have a book drive every year and a couple of blood drives. And we realized in the hospital, what kept her, alive literally was blood. Blood donations are so huge. If you can donate blood, do it. Please do it. A lot of kids depend on that every day. But the book stuff is great. There's a thing called literally healing. My voice is going. Pardon me. And that they bring a cart of books by to sick kids every day. I'm like, pick your book. It's free every day. Get a free book. I'm like, this is amazing. We both were all blown away by that. And we thought, okay, if we are able to, we're going to actually help that foundation and fund that. So the Team Evie Foundation is all about gathering money for books, to buy books, book donations, to give the kids at CHLA, Children's Hospital in Los Angeles, and hopefully we're expanding it. I think every sick kid needs blood and books, among other things. But yeah, it was nice to have, sort of, it's the upside to a very sad thing. I think she would approve. We obviously wish that she were here with us to run the foundation, because she'd be so much better at than we are, her parents. But she was always smarter than we are. But yeah, so thank you for mentioning that. It's teamevie.com. God, I hope I got that right.
Yep. Well, no, Team Evie Foundation.
EVIE. Yeah. So that's all there. If you want, give money, give books, give blood, whatever you can. It helps, these kids who really could use that extra, lift, both physically and mentally.
Yeah.
Thank you, Robert, for that. Thank you for
Duane,
that.
Thank you for again taking the time, everybody, to check out his collection. And
thank you.
We will see you next time.